to Holding These Truths Again. My name is Dr. Anthony Rizzi of the Institute for Advanced Physics, and we're here at Fort McHenry in Baltimore, the battle site at which the Star-Spangled Banner was written. It is the 2nd of July, the actual day we declared our independence. We're here to celebrate the 250th birthday of America, the semi-quincentennial. But few really know the incredible principles that guide us. We want to reclaim those principles, hold them again, finally. Those principles have produced fruits so great in number, in so many dimensions, and in such depth that it's hard to imagine. Few ever show this dimensions and depth. We will today. We are here today looking at the American incarnation of the Western tradition, Western Christian tradition, which I argue is the strongest that's ever existed anywhere in any time, place. And we are going to do something very different that has never been done before, never. We're going to point you towards the origin of American principles in the physical world and the history of the Western world and the deep reason why we have been losing them. In doing this, we will explain, discuss, and experience how good those principles really are. We will see the wonderful places they have taken us Americans, and we'll see the profound and surprising reason why we have lost a grip on them. It's bad physics. We have many great people here to help us do this. Welcome Bishop Paprocki and Dr. Ben Carson. And in addition, we have a woman who escaped from China by learning of American principles. And we have Gene Kranz, who is the key to the success of all the moon missions and more. He coined the term, failure is not an option, a good term for us here today. Tough and competent, another good term. Two good mottos that we have to hold on to for rekindling the American spirit and our 250th birthday. As a special guest, we also have Archbishop Cordileone, who has done so much for our country in the U.S. Bishops' Conference. To further introduce our special, let me introduce Archbishop Cordileone.
I'm glad to be here to participate in the wonderful celebration of and meditation on our country. It is my hope that you will really join in thinking along with us as we discuss these important topics. Please listen carefully to these men, especially Dr. Rizzi's laying out of the principles. Dr. Rizzi is a top physicist and Thomist and has many honors across many fields. Bishop Paprocki of Springfield, Illinois, is highly respected for his work within the church and is highly knowledgeable on President Lincoln. Dr. Carson is, of course, a world-renowned brain surgeon and former presidential candidate who is also head of the American Cornerstone Institute and is the National Nutrition Advisor to the President. Let's take this time to think together and be inspired to harness all the good in our country. I can start by saying that the work of the Institute for Advanced Physics that we will discuss is essentially important in getting our country back on track. We need to start applying first principles. The founders were formed deeply in them in a way we can no longer imagine. So let's get to it and all the exciting things to learn about America.
Well, thank you so much, Archbishop. It's an honor to have you with us today. And as you know, all we're going to say and more is found in the What is America article that I've written, part 1 and part 2, and they're available at iapweb.org. Now, in looking at the American incarnation of the Western Christian tradition, let's begin with our anthem. Let's talk about it.
In the background over Dr. Rizzi's shoulder is Fort McHenry, the famous place that we all know of. And over my shoulder here is the bay. It's out in this bay that the British ship HMS Tonnant commanded the firing on the fort. Francis Scott Key boarded the command ship at one point to negotiate for an American physician who was a prisoner. During his time in the bay, Key was inspired to write our national anthem, saying after the heat of the battle, "And the rocket's red glare gave proof through the night that our flag was still there." Throughout our time, let this backdrop remind you of our national anthem's important lyrics and thus our principled country. The song reminds us of our motto, "In God we trust." We'll listen to it and see how it brings out our principles. We have a deep natural law foundation. With the right understanding of the physical world, we can prove God, who is truth himself, our last end for which we and the country exist.
Our principles are still with us, enshrined in the Declaration and the Constitution, as apples of gold and settings of silver, as Lincoln said.
They still live in our country, but they have been dying. They've been taken over by a parasitic action of our equation-alone physics. Stay tuned to learn about that. Let's look at what that infection has done to us since 1965. Dan?
Belief in God, 97% versus 81% today. 94% identified as Christians versus 62%. Church attendance is way down. There was a time when we even had laws about working on certain days of the week to regard the Sabbath. We had so much in all of our laws that acknowledged our relationship with God.
And in education since 65, humanities education has almost evaporated, replaced by a constructive system, subjectivism, and school prayer has been gotten rid of. People used to be released for religious instructions, for Bible readings. There was Christmas nativity plays all across the public schools and across the whole public square. All now are fundamentally banned in various ways. The pop elite culture, the music and the movies and TVs have all been degraded to nothing. The songs in the past had meaning and harmony. TV was always respectful to priests, nuns, and religious. Movies like Man for All Seasons were common and were sort of the mainstay. The lyrics and music now random and vulgar and even approving of the grossest violence. Family has been destroyed. Friendship even. People are isolated from each other. They don't form the kind of friendships. Large family used to be common in the 60s, and divorce is now common. Abortion is common, as we know. Contraception is what used to be banned and all this happened in the 60s, changed radically. The family was redefined, male-female identity is redefined. People are not investing in each other. They just don't, they're surface. They don't want to talk to each other because they don't want to fight, and we're losing that. There used to be only 3 TV networks, so we had like a focus. Now everyone literally has his own channel. Nobody's with each other. From what we've seen, it's obvious that we've been losing our principles for 60 years pretty steadily and quickly. Ben, we're doing something wholly unique in this program. We're taking a grounded principles stance. We Americans are defined by those grounded principles. Why don't we discuss that a little bit? What do you think about the importance of learning and seeking truth?
Well, I think we certainly should discuss them and do what we need to do to see the importance of learning and seeking truth, just like the men of old did.
And like the Carson's Fund that you're doing is really an effort to get people to think, and I think we need more things like that. So
absolutely, people who are well educated and who know things are very difficult to mislead.
Yeah. And if you listen to them, find those people and stick with them and sit at their feet, that's really going to help. So in early America, people were like this. People don't realize that, Ben. I'm sure you know that mountain men were educated. People were shocked by that.
Absolutely. When de Tocqueville came here and he was studying our country, he would go out in the forest and find these guys, and they could read. They could tell you about the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't like that in other countries.
Yeah.
Those one-room schoolhouses taught our kids.
Yeah. And that's really what we have to get back to, right? I mean, we have to, and I want to call everyone to that, to call people back to study. One of the things of this show is to get the articles, read, learn about the Constitution, but learn the principles back behind them.
So let's ask, what are the principles? How do we reason to them? Where did they come from? And what has gone wrong?
Well, how about we discuss what went right first, and then we'll get back to what went wrong, because that's the excellent question. Let's understand America and all the great things she has done through living those principles. In that discussion, we can discuss how they were hijacked, taken away from themselves. And still, we need some American background on the problem. And let's give some things that almost no one knows first. We're the first principled country in history, and that's never been done, was never done before. And the oldest country in the world defined by its government. That's unique. We're a natural law, Christian culture-based country. Our whole country is based in that background. It's not a puritanical country. It's not merely Protestant. It's not an Enlightenment country. It's much deeper than that. We're the American incarnation of the Western Catholic tradition. The first principled country makes us totally unique, but we're infected with this scientism, but it's not fully expressed at the beginning, but now it's becoming expressed, and we have to get rid of it. What is this infection? To understand, we have to go to the American principles. And here's the good stuff. We've inherited the natural law and supernatural law culture from the Catholic Church through England. The general Christian culture grounded with explicit principles articulated by the founders and built into the country's self-understanding, especially in the documents. The American growth is founded in that Catholic Christian tradition that's built into our culture. We have this solid physics, this solid understanding of the physical world that we've inherited through this principle grounded in a proper, rigorous general understanding of the physical world. The founders knew the physical world. And then we have a general political inheritance of natural law, including a respect for the freedom of the church and understanding man is made for God. Then we have a particular thing that we've been handed politically, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution with an enumerated Bill of Rights, including the respect for authority and subsidiarity. And then we have a particular science we've been given, this great modern scientific method handed down, but more grounded understanding than other people because we're grounded in this pioneer nature. This country, these people went out into the wilderness. And because of ensconced principles in the government and social life, we were able to resist the problems with understanding that science. And this moved to the infection now. The infection is a modern science that's misdigested. Equations begin to substitute for understanding. Symbols substitute for actual understanding. So we have what I call an equation-alone physics base that grows with modern science that's a parasitic attack on the natural law and the eternal law. Natural philosophers started to bring together bad understanding into politics, but this did not affect us as much because our declaration was written before Kant wrote his Critique of Pure Reason, before the modern philosophy got ahead into people. So we can compare the healthy tree of truth on the screen that we're showing now with the equation-alone based thinking on the screen now. And you see one is petrified and dead because it has a bad base, and the other one growing and healthy because it has the physics, and out of that grows in that political understanding and everything else. The French Revolution reveals the logic that we Americans did not take of the equation-alone thinking. The French Revolution was anti-reason fundamentally, though it can't claim to be reason-based. It was anti-God, it was violence-based. Even Thomas Paine, who was the only somewhat anti-Christian founder, was disliked by the French when he told them, "You must return to God." He told them that, and they did not like him. So with that background, let's lay out our plan.
Well, let's go through those principles, although, from what you just talked about, it's easy to see why our second president, John Adams, said our Constitution was designed for a moral and religious people and is inadequate for the government of any other.
That's right.
But let's go through those principles and their origins and their fruit.
Yeah, okay, and we can touch sometimes on the equation-alone infection that's eating it up on this way as we do that.
After that, we can talk about the supernatural versus natural law and eternal law, the Declaration and the Constitution. Then we can go through history, 1760 to 1965, showing the principles, the fruits. And then Dr. Rizzi touches on the equation-alone infection and how it overtook American principles in 1965 and has continued since that time. And lastly, we will discuss how to regain and to celebrate them. For our first topic, supernatural versus natural, I'll hand my seat to Bishop Pefraki.
So there's a forgotten distinction between natural and supernatural, and it arises at some level from churchmen trying to recover the supernatural while losing the battle against the scientism. The equation-alone physics wants to assert that and wants to assert that the supernatural is just fairy tale land, it's not important, it's not real. And this ended up with, because the clergymen trying to retreat into the supernatural, ended up with us leaving the culture retreating away from the supernatural. In fact, there are two distinct domains I want to talk about, okay? So Bishop, can you tell us something of the difference between supernatural and natural? For example, are miracles supernatural? And like Washington being saved by the fog in the Battle of New York, can you tell us about that? Is that
Sure. Yeah, well, using the definition that nature is anything created and supernature is anything to do with God himself, such as the things of grace, faith, as understood by the church, is an example of something supernatural, since it requires grace. For example, while there is historical evidence that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, lived in Nazareth, and was crucified under Pontius Pilate, believing that Jesus was the Son of God and was conceived by the Holy Spirit are matters of faith that we come to believe through God's grace. Miracles have a natural as well as a supernatural element. For example, It could well be that God created the conditions for the fog that saved Washington at the Battle of New York. But the fog itself could be described as a natural phenomenon that could have happened without God's intervention.
So let me sharpen that up a little bit. It looks like God did intervene by his power, creating conditions for fog, but of course the fog was a natural phenomenon itself. So we can summarize, the natural law is created, the supernatural is God himself, for example, grace. The natural law is reason's access to the eternal law, and the eternal law is God's broader ordinances like Christian revelation. So the American incarnation of the Christian Catholic tradition includes both, we'll see. So let's move on to talk about the natural and the eternal law.
What is natural law? It's reason's access to how we should live. The founders of our nation followed reason. So let's go through real first principles and some history.
Okay. So let me start. So everything we know comes through what we know through the senses. We know the physical world through our senses. That's what we see. The study of the physical world is called physics. That's the name of it. So everything we know is built on the understanding of the physical world. That is our physics. So the natural law arises from our understanding of the physical world, our physics. And now for the infection. If our physics goes wrong, then the natural law will, to that degree, be wrong. Modern science is great and wonderful and necessary. It's hard to overestimate, but it has not been properly digested. And that's a serious problem that has to be recognized. It hasn't been. Our science, whose core is modern physics, is an equation-alone physics. Crack a physics book and see. We physicists develop equations, but have over the centuries ignored the step to understand what those equations actually tell us about the physical things, the essence of things. What is the essence? We capture it in equations, but not fully physically understood by us. That's the process the Institute for Advanced Physics is doing. Hence, our natural understanding of the world is confused and even wrong. America is defined by her natural law understanding, and America is attacked at her core by the equational physics, because that's the base. The founders' statements are increasingly impenetrable to us. So many people read them and they can't hear what they're saying the way they meant it. So how does physics connect to the natural law? We start by seeing physical things, as we said, and then we conclude we are knowers through the senses, and you see the science before science to understand that. So we know through our bodies. Our bodies are essential to us, and why? Because we know through them. We figure out we are made to know. The infection of the equation-alone base, which makes bypassing the physical world easy, can and does make me stop seeing myself as a knower, because if I don't know things, I don't reflect and say, hey, I'm a knower. But we are made for truth nonetheless. We're still made that way. And so what we're oriented toward. Knowing we're made to know is the immediate basis of all our rights and of America herself.
Well, this basic understanding was ensconced in European culture, especially in England by the Catholic Church, and then inherited by the American colonies. And this is part of what Dr. Rizzi calls American incarnation of Catholic tradition. So one of the most influential thinkers in the history of Catholic theology and Western philosophy was St. Thomas Aquinas, who lived from around 1225 to 1274. He was an Italian Dominican friar and priest who gave us all an example of how to dedicate ourselves to truth, the core thing for which we are made. We are made to know the truth, ultimately truth himself, as we read in the Gospel of St. John, where Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life.
That's really important.
Following the demands of our human nature, St. Thomas started with what we know through the senses and built upon the work of Aristotle. The basic principles of the natural law are invoked in the Declaration of Independence. So we can say that the natural law is the core principle of American thinking and has been the mainstay of American thinking and life.
And Western culture established by the Catholic Church through grace and understanding that comes from faith gives the cultural stability to be able to hold on to those natural truths, understanding and doing so in a way never seen before. In the Middle Ages, St. Thomas Aquinas built on Aristotle and set the natural law fully into the intellectual life of Europe. But Europe had it infra-scientifically before that. It lived this Christian natural law tradition deeply.
The Magna Carta in England in 1215 reflected Christian thinking and the critical development of the understanding of the role of government and authority. Men of England, as in all parts of Christendom, did not deny the authority of the governmental head, that is, the king. However, they understood that by nature, man has an end, which entails duties and rights that inform and transcend those of the king. Thus, the king was to serve the common good of the community, which is the higher good of each individual, who in turn, like the common good of the community, is ordered towards the highest common good, namely God.
Yeah.
This is the root of the Magna Carta, respect for the king as an authority insofar as he is under the author, respecting the nature of the world he created and his will generally, that is, nature and nature's God.
Yes. So Washington said in his Thanksgiving speech, we should promote our true religion. And he understood the necessity for the Christian culture. That's what he was talking about, is the promoting the Christian religion as a necessary part of the foundation of making those principles actually function. The founders were profoundly influenced by St. Thomas and Aristotle, even though unwittingly. Man has dignity because, as we said, he's made to know. You can see he's a knower, finally to know truth himself. And he has freedom, which means the right to do what's right. This freedom to do the right must be respected. Archbishop Corleone, can you tell us what Junipero Serra's role in bringing the natural law to the American West was?
Junipero Serra was a brilliant university professor of theology in Spain. He had a very comfortable sinecure position, but he left it all to become a missionary. He understood the intrinsic human dignity of all people. He made heroic sacrifices to defend the indigenous people against the abuses of his fellow Spaniards, the soldiers. He walked with the sore leg all up and down the coast to establish the missions along with the schools and to educate the indigenous population, to teach them the trades, and above all, to evangelize them so that they could be equal Spanish citizens, fellow Catholics, and eventually hand the territory of the missions over to them for their own self-governance when they became able to do so. There are many examples of the heroic sacrifices he made to defend the indigenous people, again, because of understanding their intrinsic human dignity.
So his giving general education and human help to the American Indians, as well as his explicit understanding that they were of the same nature as himself and all men and all Europeans, and were therefore to be treated with equal dignity, that is all part of the natural law that he inculcated, right?
Yes, he understood that natural law. That's our human dignity, right? And one thing he did, people want to rewrite history. I often say you cannot rewrite buildings. Wherever there was a mission established with the military outpost, the presidio, the barracks for the soldiers, we see that they're miles apart. They originally put everything together when they settled in San Diego on a bluff overlooking the harbor. Uh, there was an Indian uprising because of the abuses of the soldiers, especially to the women. One of the friars was killed by an arrow of an Indian. Sarah pleaded for clemency for him because he understood why there was an uprising. They moved the mission, school, and friary several miles inland and kept the presidio where it is, several miles apart. We see that elsewhere where there was a military outpost. We see it in Santa Barbara, we see it in Carmel, and we see it in San Francisco. They kept the soldiers away from the Indians.
So California became part of Mexico and then part of the U.S. Explain the difference in how they were treated, the Indians were treated, the American Indians were treated.
When the missions were secularized after Mexico obtained its independence, the Franciscans were expelled, the schools were closed, and the Indians lost everything that the Franciscans had given to them. Lincoln is the one who deeded the missions back to the church.
An American incarnation of the Catholic tradition, right there.
In fact, in San Diego, where I'm from, I grew up a little over 3 miles from the mission there in San Diego. And I know the curator of the museum. She showed me and some friends the actual document signed by Abraham Lincoln,
Amazing.
deeding the mission back to the church. So they understood the founding principles.
As Lincoln said, there is no right to do wrong.
Right. So let me talk a little bit more about the American incarnation, the Christian tradition here on our money. There's a lot of wind here, so I'm going to keep the dollar bill in my hand very firmly so it doesn't. This is the dollar bill here. On the back of every dollar bill, there is something that most people don't look at. It's the Great Seal of the United States. And this includes an image of God's providence, a triangle symbolizing the all-seeing God Trinity. The triangle, of course, is a symbol of the Trinity. Dates way back to the Catholic Church in early centuries. The words above the triangle are annuit ceptus, which means God has favored our beginning. The words Novus Ordo Secolorum are from Virgil's Eclogue, the fourth Eclogue, which speaks of the coming of the new age, an age of gold, in which in turn the church fathers and anyone trained in that time in the classical tradition, like the founders were, took to mean the coming of Christ. So the Great Seal and the money, and thus I point to our principal country, America, which they wanted with his help to promote Christ and Christ's teaching, especially as incarnated in the Christian culture then.
So to discuss the Declaration, I'll hand my seat over to Dr. Carson, founder and chairman of the American Cornerstone Institute.
We celebrate July the 4th because it is the day Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration contains a succinct statement of the defining principles of America.
Yeah, it's really profound. It encapsulates the principles of the natural law ensconced by the Catholic Church. The core points of the Declaration can be traced almost point for point to St. Robert Bellarmine, who repeated the teachings of Thomas Aquinas. This is outlined in my article, What is America, Part 1. In relation to defending the right to go off and form the world's first principled country, it starts with nature and nature's God. This is the proper way to refer to God, for we only know him through nature and through proper physics.
Then the Declaration goes on. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Amazing words. Now, man has a right to life because he's a knower, a self, thus has an end for himself, namely truth himself. Life is our first right because no other right can happen without it. Many misunderstandings of this right occur. You can see this in my What is America article, too, explains this and many things that you have not heard before. Liberty to become what we are meant to be so as to contribute to the common good, which is a higher good and which will make us happy.
And what is our goal? Everyone wants to be happy. I don't know anybody who doesn't want to be happy.
Everybody wants to be. Can you tell us some about your own experience with liberty and how that helped you be free to become who you are?
Well, as a youngster, I grew up mostly in dire poverty, wasn't a very good student. And my mother, who had a very, very difficult life, knew that getting a good education was the key to freedom. The thing that I hated most when I was a youngster was poverty. Some people hate rats and roaches. I hated poverty. But, when my mother made me start reading, and then later on, I got the bug myself, and she didn't have to make me read. I read everything I could get my hands on. If I had 5 minutes, I was reading a book. And guess what? Then I became free. I didn't hate poverty anymore. The reason I didn't hate it anymore is because I knew I could change it. That knowledge that gave me that freedom to really begin to explore the world. And it makes all the difference in the world. And that's why Jesus says, you should know the truth, and the truth will make you free.
Yeah. And it was the right to do what's right that set you free, to go and find the truth and then live. And you were in a country where you could exercise the right so you could do what you had to do.
Absolutely.
So we are made to grow into what we are meant to be, and finally to be with truth himself, where all will be abundantly fulfilled and all our desires will be fulfilled in him. And St. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle make this clear. The Declaration is clearly pointing to a deep understanding of our human nature is transmitted by European culture in a profound way. It really is transmitted in such a profound way, deep in our bones. The founding fathers had a gut understanding of human nature and natural law generally that we can't even imagine. We don't even have a wisp of it today. If we could just borrow a wisp of it, it would change so much.
Absolutely.
If our leaders, even Catholic and Christian ones, had a fraction of this formation, we'd be so much better off. The founders, as I just said, the founders were way more Catholic, more Christian than us in that way. They were more culturally in contact with nature and nature's God.
And isn't it cool that we're the nation whose founding document talks about our Creator and our relationship with him?
The document itself, right? Yeah. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas said the best form of government was a republic, like the U.S., and the Constitution puts 3 branches of government to meet the 2 aspects of ourself, both our limited nature and our flawed nature. We need each other, and so we have these 3 branches so people can have different perspectives, and they can fill in each person has different gifts, and each person can take where his gift is most profound, and they can reflect each other. So the legislative, executive, and judicial correspond to decision, action, and reflection. So some people are better at decisions, some people are better at executing those decisions, some people are better at reflecting on those decisions. So the complementary roles call for complementary talents and perspectives that facilitate the generation of fresh ideas and grow all men in their growth, and especially proper governing. And so it's hard to miss errors when people are, somebody makes an error over here and somebody says, wait a second, that doesn't sound right, and corrects it. But then our fallen nature, well, we know that our nature tends to go maybe a little bit away from God towards selfishness, and this can check it. Wait a second, you're not going to do that. The other branch, and that's the one that's more well known. But this rounded out that our talents complement each other. That part's not so known. Then we come to the Bill of Rights itself, and which is the 10 amendments that came to enumerate some rights. We have at the very beginning freedom of religion, and then we have the 9th and 10th amendments that tell us that this is not just a list of all, this is not all you know about human nature. If you just satisfy these, you're not done. There's lots of things you have to respect in your fellow man, just in ordinary life. It's not a list that's just exhaustive. It's trying to send you back to the natural law and think about how you should treat your fellow man.
And isn't it amazing that the first right was freedom of religion?
Yeah, the first right, the first enumerated right is freedom of religion, because it's so important, because you have to have that right. Either as individuals or at any level, we have to have these rights, and this just puts them down for the federal government. But everyone knows that the right to life still applies down. The right to follow God comes all the way down to the bottom, and we should respect each other's rights, to the states and all the way down. And the founders always knew that, except for the one issue of slavery, which we'll talk about. So either as individuals at any level, we have to have that principle of subsidiarity, that each level takes its own life.
Yes. And let me say that freedom of religion, which says Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion, it didn't mean America could be a place that didn't have a Christian culture. The founders thought America needed Christianity to flourish, as it did. And as I said before, Adam said, our Constitution is only for religious and moral people. We put them at the foundation of our nation.
Right. That's why it's the first right, the freedom for people to follow Christ without the government saying, no, you're not going to do that, which is what other places did. They had that interference. And the church did not get her freedom.
And, it was really no accident that we went from nothing to the pinnacle of the world in record time.
In record time.
It was because of our values and our principles.
Yeah. And that Christian culture that was there in the background, and that we held on to them. And
absolutely.
So on the natural and supernatural components of culture, we must have at least a certain minimum level that the founders had. The Christian element stabilizes human reason. That's why science came nowhere else in the but Western culture. You didn't have science anywhere else, in any place else in the world. It took the Catholic culture to incarnate that gospel truth that the world is good, and then had grace available so that people could maintain their reason. Without God's help, we lose our reason. We become unreasonable. And the founders knew the duty to God were part of right reason. That was something they could figure out and did. And they knew you could prove his existence from the physical world. Every single one of them. It's not a matter of faith for them. For us, it's a matter of faith. But for them, they knew that you could prove it. And we got to get back to that kind of simple, here's what I see. They knew, as passed on by the Catholic Church, that there was a distinction between church and state. They knew to keep government out of deciding supernatural revelation, they had to keep the government out of it. This means, by default, non-interfering with various Christian denominations, especially the Catholic Church. When the Pope asked Franklin who to appoint, the Pope must have been shocked when Franklin said, that's your business, that's none of our business. That never happens in human history. Everyone wants to use the church's power. That just never happens. I think it's wholly unique. The seal of confession was quickly protected by law, as it still is today. But note, the state does have a transcendental end that is naturally known. That's God. The state's end is God, and the founders knew that. We must follow reason, but we must respect growth and truth at the level of culture. We can't force the addition table till people are actually educated in addition. Even more so with the supernatural revelation of the church. We need to respect where people are at and help grow them to where they need to be. In the past, this was done by allowing Christian prayer, but exempting those other religions who were not comfortable with it. And they knew reason tells us that the natural symbols, such as a man praying and the Ten Commandments, need to be used, need to be displayed, because people need to know that natural law. It's right to display also Christian symbolism, but respectful of others at the same time. Again, a man convinced against his own understanding is not convinced. So you don't force it on people, but you also don't try to let that culture that's the base of everything else be destroyed. You've got to protect that. So, for example, there's no right to Satanism. There's no right to go against God. We know that that's no any more than there's a right to have a protest against the addition table.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Satan is on the same scale.
And, God is our guide, as seen in our motto, in God we trust. It's on all of our money, every coin in your pocket, every bill in your wallet. It says, in God we trust. What does that mean? America culturally accepts Christianity, but starts with reason, not revelation. Washington added, so help me God. That's part of the law.
Yes, it was part of the law that judges had to add, so help me God, to their oath.
God has always been there, will always be there.
And he started that tradition at the inaugural oath of saying, so help me God, and then kissing the Bible, right? That was passed along from president to president. They kissed the Bible. So they wanted to protect Christian tradition as part and parcel of what it means to be in America.
And, it brings up an interesting argument, because there's some non-Christian religions. They're welcome here too.
Yeah.
But we want to make sure that people know that it's okay. You don't have to bury your religion.
Yeah.
Because your belief system, particularly your relationship with God, shows up in your actions.
Right.
It shows up in how you treat other people. You certainly don't go around trying to cancel people.
No.
You love your neighbor.
That's right. And you love him by respecting him enough to have the argument with him, discuss with him, and say, well, have you thought about this? And that's what the founders did. They put up, here's what I think. And the other person reasoned back, and the person who gave the best explanation, who had the truth, was the one that would win the day. And that's what should happen, is we put out our arguments there and we say, look, this is the truth, and what do you think about that?
And the fact is, you always learn more from people you don't agree with than people who agree with you on everything.
There you go. That's right. There's always that truth that you just didn't pay attention to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so now that we've looked at the Constitution and the Declaration, now let's go through our history with an eye towards its principles. Virtue that the men had and we need to have, and their fruits, the fruits that these principles gave.
The first period, from 1760 to 89, includes the Revolutionary War, and we have our founders discussing and bringing forth the documents of our country. This can happen because of their particular virtues that they strove after, and education. They call us back to honesty, truth, right reason, study, and reverence.
So yeah, I mean, Washington had that character, did he not? There was just an amazingly solid character. The cherry tree story, I think, is sort of iconic, whether it's true or not. It demonstrates what people thought of him, what he was.
And you look at people like Jefferson, and he had over 2,000 books. And I think he actually read them.
He had this huge library, yeah.
They were very knowledgeable about things that had occurred before. And they were able to use that knowledge to stay away from the same kind of mistakes that other societies had made.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about, the fact that our founders studied all the other civilizations, but they also studied things like calculus.
Yeah.
Adams taught his son calculus.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
I mean, can you imagine that? These are pretty smart guys.
Yeah, and it hadn't been discovered that long ago. It's not like there's tons of textbooks around. Newton, he lived like 100 years before that.
Exactly.
80 years.
And Ben Franklin, who was really a very sage, wise old man.
Yeah.
It was him, when he was trying to convince the rest of them that they needed to go back to God.
Yes.
He said, if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without God's notice, is it likely that a nation, an empire can rise without itself?
Exactly. Yeah.
Very, very practical.
Very practical, very down there. Right. I mean, and our dependence on God is a practical thing, But, I don't think people realize the the commitment that they had and how hard it was for those central men to organize people and get, people were doing this and that. I'm too busy. I can't have time for this.
Yeah.
I have to do my farm. I just got married. All the excuses.
Yeah. Every society historically has had to deal with slavery.
Yeah.
So the United States was not unique in that sense.
Yeah.
They were unique, however, in the sense that we had so many people who were vehemently opposed to it that we fought a bloody civil war and lost
right.
a large portion of
That's,
the
I think, a
population to
huge
get rid
point.
of it.
That gross evil was also, a lot of blood was shed to stop it. And then the Northwest Territory ordinance was proof of that. They passed this thing that will not allow slavery. You will not allow slavery in these areas. They did that almost immediately.
And then almost at the same time we were having our revolution, the French were having theirs, but theirs did not include God. And you see, it led to the reign of terror, and this terrible slaughter of all kinds of people. It was a massacre.
Yeah, it was horrible. And it was violence was their code, not reason.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to convince their fellow man, they got rid of their fellow man that disagreed with them.
Exactly.
And that's totally opposed to reason, because we're meant to grow each other together. Each one of us has an irreplaceable place.
Right.
You and I were talking about that. Each person, without that person, it's not a sentimental thing, it's an accurate thing. The world is missing something it needs.
No question about it. My wife and I were talking about that this morning. If we had been killed in an accident that we almost had, we would thought about all the people who wouldn't be here and all the things that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
But he has a plan for each one of us. And that's one of the reasons that we're so vehement with our support of pro-life.
Yeah. But the slave, I like your point about the slavery issue, because that evil, the blood that we spilt, that men spilt over that, is so important, because it reveals a hole in our national character that we tried to fill, that we filled by the war. So I know Bishop Paprocki is an expert on Lincoln. So let's bring him in now to talk a little bit about this period and get his expertise. He lived near Lincoln, so maybe that rubs off.
He came from there yesterday.
Yeah. The next period is a period of growth from 1790 to 1865. Francis Scott Key was in this period, and he wrote the Star-Spangled Banner in 1814 right here at Fort McHenry. We have behind us here. And that's an amazing thing we've talked about. Thomas Jefferson wrote his amazing letter to the Ursuline nuns in New Orleans in 1804, and I have that letter right here, or a copy of it right here, and where he says to the nuns, I offer them my help in any way I can be of help to you, holy sisters. Then there's the amazing Battle of New Orleans in 1815, when Americans were outnumbered 2-1 and seemed an impossible situation. Andrew Jackson asked the local Ursuline nuns, the same Ursuline nuns that Jefferson offered his help to, and they asked Mary, the mother of Jesus, to pray for her help in interceding into our Lord. And guess what? They won the battle in 30 minutes. And people were stunned. So the nuns and others called Mary under the title Our Lady of Prompt Succor, which they still do in Louisiana, and thanked her for her intercession, her prayers. And Jackson made sure he got himself and his troops to the Mass of Thanksgiving that was offered with the Ursuline nuns. So there's more of the American incarnation. Also in this period, American ingenuity coming from American principles led to many huge inventions, which we can't cover them all, but they're amazing. From the cotton gin to the steamboat, to the Transcontinental Railway, to the Morse Code. So by this time in 1865, there are 36 states already. It's amazing. Meanwhile, there were an increasing number of tensions over the betrayal principle, the horrible betrayal principle that is the huge hole in our national life, was a huge hole, the evil of slavery. It's hard to overestimate what that did to our fellow men. Lincoln was core in addressing this physically in principle and with respect to God. Bishop, can you tell us something about Lincoln?
As you know, I'm the Bishop of Springfield in Illinois, known as the land of Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln lived in Illinois for about 20 years before he was elected president. And on June 16th, 1858, he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," referring to the agitation over slavery that the country was experiencing at that time. Lincoln said that, in his opinion, such agitation will not cease until the crisis shall have reached and passed. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. For Lincoln, the Declaration of Independence was not just a document of deliverance from colonial rule, but a truth proclaiming man's natural rights. For Lincoln, the vision of America was the Declaration of Independence. If the nation ever lost that ideal of freedom, it would die. It was in the Lincoln-Douglas debates that Lincoln spelled out his political philosophy. Stephen Douglas was the most famous political name on the American scene at the time. He advocated the cause of what he called popular sovereignty. Lincoln countered that the Douglas proposal opened the possibility of slavery in the territories. Douglas would give a 3-hour speech, followed by Lincoln, who would speak almost as long.
Oh.
We would do well to emulate the extended thinking that went into the political debates of that time.
For sure, yeah.
In 1863, President Lincoln made Thanksgiving a national holiday. Lincoln proclaimed the last Thursday in November as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwells in the heavens. And I recommend to them that while offering up the ascriptions justly due to him for such singular deliverances and blessings, they do also pray with humble penitence for our national perverseness and disobedience. One of my hobbies is running, and sometimes I run past the Lincoln Depot, the train station where Mr. Lincoln delivered his farewell address to the citizens of Springfield following his election as president. He said, and this is about 1,000 people that were gathered there. They said the most emotional speech he ever gave because he was leaving. So he says, I now leave not knowing when or whether ever I may return, with a task before me greater than that which rested upon Washington. Without the assistance of that divine being, whoever attended him, I cannot succeed. With that assistance, I cannot fail. Well, then on March 4th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln took the oath of office for the second time, and Lincoln's second inaugural address previewed his plans for healing a once divided nation. I have often thought that it reads like a homily. He concluded with these words, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Those words are timeless, and we would do well to heed them today.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Powerful quote.
It's very powerful. That second inaugural address, we'll talk about that more because that's just amazing. Can you tell us the quote about being on God's side? Because that's another amazing quote.
Yes, on one occasion, a delegation of Methodist clergy visited the White House, and one of the pastors told Mr. Lincoln, "We will prevail because God is on our side." And President Lincoln replied, "The question should always be, are we on his side?"
So true. Yeah, so true. So in this period, the next period, we're covering so much good stuff, 1865 to 1940, we have an explosion of U.S. fruits. In them, we see the flowering of the American incarnation of the Western Christian tradition, which is so important. The first thing is Michelson measures the speed of light and wins the Nobel Prize eventually for it. It's an amazing thing. The speed of light is a very hard thing to measure on the ground because it's so fast. We have the Wright brothers inventing the airplane. That's a whole discussion we could have on that. And then, there's just a plethora of others. Bell inventing the telephone, Ford's inventing the assembly line, Edison with his light bulb and his phonograph. I mean, it's just amazing. Any one of these things are just amazing. But these are all coming from America. We have the invention of movies and more. We'll talk about Walt Disney and other things, but I want to talk briefly about Mark Twain, an unlikely example of the American incarnation of the Catholic tradition. But he wrote a biography of St. Joan of Arc, which he says makes his other books look awful. It's not quite a thing coming from Mark Twain. Chesterton credits him with making her known to the world, apparently finally to her own canonization, amazingly enough, because that book was so widely appreciated. And we have an amazing second inaugural address that you've mentioned, which invokes the incredible Catholic imagery of offering up sacrifices, that we're continually completing the sacrifices of Christ. And this is what he's calling people to during the Civil War. You really can't read that without hearing that message. And we have the court invoking the natural law against polygamy. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can only have one wife, but it's against the natural law, so they invoke the natural law. We have the beginning of the fight against communism, which really helps to make us pay attention to our principles when we see a contrast like communism, with the breaking of diplomatic ties with Russia in 1917. In 1917, it was the children had the apparitions in Portugal, reportedly seeing Mary, who warns them about the communism of Russia, which America uniquely responds to with the Blue Army. That doesn't happen anyplace else but here, in the American incarnation of the Catholic tradition. We have the founding of Boys Town in 1917 through 1936, and the award-winning movie that broke box office records, starring Spencer Tracy in 1938. We have the secondary motto of the United States, which we haven't talked about, which relates to this, et pluribus unum, which is immigrants come from all over the place and they adopt the principles of America. What it means to become an American is not to cross the boundary line, but to accept and want to promote and grow themselves and others in the principles, the natural law principle. And that's what Americans did. That's what immigrants typically did. From many, one. Each one brought their unique talents and cultural background that's good, left the baggage behind and brought the good. And there's many examples of that. They did not dissolve their country's inheritance that they came from. They brought it and made America better. The goodness and strengths then became part of America. An example in the religious domain is St. Patrick's Day. The Irish came here. St. Patrick's Day is much bigger here than it is in Ireland. And everybody celebrates St. Patrick's Day. And St. Nicholas is huge in America. That's a Catholic thing. Christmas came to be celebrated more extensively and more firmly through all the varied traditions than it is anywhere in the world. We have our problems, but that even today, Christmas holds on. St. Joseph is known, for example, through the St. Joseph's altar. Archbishop Cordileone, you have an immigrant family. Can you tell us about how your American family enculturated?
Then my parents were of that greatest generation, and, my father served in World War II, and they were proud to be Americans. My father was very patriotic. He loved his Sicilian heritage, but he was also very patriotic. So it's the real immigrant story.
Yeah. Your family preserved the Catholic tradition of godparents in a way that the Italians did not.
When I referred to my godmother, you remember that story? I heard to my godmother and said, "Why do you call her your godmother?" She's your aunt. They lost that practice in Italy.
So to further see the American incarnation of this period and the Pope's acknowledgement of it, listen to Pope Leo XIII, who Leo XIV named himself after, one of the most important popes, probably, in my opinion, probably the most important pope, and he praises America in this way. He's in recent times. He says in 1899, "We plainly discern latent forces for the advancement alike of civilization and Christianity," which over and over again you see that truth about. Dr. Carson has joined me again to discuss the next period of the consolidation of U.S. principles from 1940 to 1965. Under the impetus of Nazis and communists, the rejection of right reason reached a kind of screaming peak, and thus the natural law and human dignity were under attack. America was moved to look more deeply at her and defend her principles more deeply than ever. Communists rejected God outright. Americans understood the threat in a principled way. We called them not the anti-capitalists, but the godless communists. The godless communists.
Most unfortunate, Nazis had a goal to wipe out Christianity. Nazis killed 6 million Jews, 2 to 3 million Catholics, and hundreds of thousands of disabled people and people that they thought were not worthy of life. America took stock of her principles and consolidated them in a deep and cultural way. This led to strong upsurgence of respect for family and the centrality of Christ to our national life, and generally a renewed commitment to the centrality of God to our national identity. And it was really that horrible time when Nazism was threatening us, when Marxism and all these isms, communism, they try to get God out because they want to be the principal thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it never seems to lead to happiness and peace.
It's funny. It usually leads to what we just saw, millions of people being slaughtered.
Exactly.
We didn't even talk about the number of people slaughtered by Stalin.
It always happens.
It always happens, and you reject God, the principle, the end.
Yeah.
Motherhood, baseball, and apple pie, that sort of summarizes America, and that includes, so you see the family. Go ahead.
Because, motherhood, it focuses you on the family.
Yeah.
And how incredibly important it is to have those family values passed on from generation to generation. When a child is born, they're like an empty slate, and they're waiting to be programmed, and the parents get to be the first ones to program them.
Mm-hmm.
And that determines the direction of their lives at that point. Baseball is talking about teamwork, working together.
Yeah.
And, those who want to change this nation, they change it by dividing us.
Mm-hmm.
The divided house cannot stand. Jesus said it first. Abraham Lincoln repeated it.
Yeah.
And apple pie, good nutrition.
You got that in. That's good.
Absolutely.
No, but the whole image of apple pie and motherhood brings, like you said, the image of the family right to the front,
Right.
and the importance of that mother, that steady mother that Lincoln said, if it weren't everything I've done and been, it could not have happened without my angel mother. And the importance of that mother being there and being present and doing things. It's always been a stayward of American thinking, that we've lost that in
And
the
the
last
father
60 years.
too.
And the father,
So important.
Yes.
Starting sometime in the mid 60s, the comedies started making the father the buffoon.
yeah.
And, it's continued for quite a while after that.
So
Fathers are very important.
yeah,
That's
Okay.
where people get a sense of right and wrong,
right.
a sense of stability
Yeah.
and protection. All of these are very good things to have.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And the Cold War really helped us to kind of amalgamate that and redefend it and re-see the importance of it. So in response to the threat of Soviet Russia, the godless communists, the U.S. Catholics formed the Blue Army that I mentioned in 1946 to pray for the conversion of Soviet Russia in answers to the requests at Fatima. American Protestants also prayed for this conversion of Russia. No group equivalent to the Blue Army, as I said, existed anywhere else. It's just in Americans. Americans get up there, we got to pray, we got to pray.
Absolutely.
And we saw on the Advent radio and TV, Bishop Sheen, who brought Catholic Christian teaching to all America and became the most popular show in the slot, beating the top comedian at the time, that shows the receptivity to Catholic teaching of Americans very naturally. We also saw Father Peyton, whose devotion to Our Lady was known in all of Hollywood, to the point where effectively any star could come to him. He could go to any star and say, would you do this for me? Have this prayer meeting, have this rosary rally. And Father Peyton gave us the famous saying that most Americans know: a family that prays together stays together. Yeah.
And you had people like Billy Graham, and you saw the incredible crowds that would come.
Yeah.
I mean, people are thirsty for the truth.
Right.
That's the key.
That's the key. And we forget that sometimes, don't we? That we don't want to say the truth because it's a little bit hard to swallow, but that's what the only thing that's going to make us happy is finally what we want to hear.
Right.
So, and American men gave their lives to defend the world against communism, the evil of communism. Our Lady of Fatima asked for this, and American men are really the only ones that stepped up and died for this cause of stopping communism all around the world. People have not been thankful enough for the blood of those men defending American principles.
And a lot of it goes back to ignorance.
Yeah.
Not knowing what happens with societies when they turn in that direction.
Yeah.
And it's the same every time. It never changes.
Yeah.
When you take God out, something has to replace him.
That's right.
And it's not going to be better than God.
That's exactly right. I think this wind of the Holy Spirit is agreeing with you, as Bishop said. So we still fight communists today. This fort reminds us that people like our next guest, Sally Wong, still fight to get to America. Let's listen to her story. She has an amazing story. Sally?
I want to tell you about my discovery of America, which my husband led me to. Growing up in communist China, all information was filtered by the Chinese authorities. One of the few American TV shows allowed was Tom and Jerry. It gave us a glimpse at America. We found out about bowling and about praying to God. Driven by a thirst for answers, my husband figured out how to use the deep web because China bans important parts of American information. Before we met, he found a collection of old American World War II movies. He was astonished at how brave, humane, and different Americans were from anyone he had seen in China. Americans had a great dedication to Christ and were willing to die for him and for their country. When my husband was about 14 years old, he fell very ill and was afraid he was going to die, remembering how Jerry, the mouse, prayed when in distress. He prayed, "God, if you want me to die, then let me die, but if you want me to do something, then let me live." China decides whether you get to go to college or not. Also, top students, such as us, were forced to attend lectures on communism as part of their coursework. We would have been brainwashed if it wasn't for the things in English my husband was finding for us by going underneath the Chinese security system. I found especially interesting the Western classics, such as Shakespeare, Dickens, Dostoevsky, and Aquinas. I was stunned to learn many of the amazing things I saw in books and movies, like A Christmas Caroling, were real and still lived out in America. We went to college together, but we had to keep our friendship a secret from everyone because dating that might lead to marriage was forbidden. In China, there is a national broadcast that tells all young adults when to get married, so you don't really know the man you marry. Eventually, we realized we needed to go to America. My husband decided to go to America to school. We eloped before he went, so I could go with him and so we could avoid the madness of the Chinese view of marriage and children. My sister was killed in the womb because she was a forbidden second child. It upset me and my mother a lot, though my mother did not understand me and my growing desire for truth. She followed the state, like we are raised to. My husband's family broke his computers, but he went to the junkyard to make more. I am so grateful for his persistence in his search for truth. It was frightening to get here. China tells its citizens that America is a violent place where everyone has guns and people are shot dead on the streets. Our parents still ask us if we have been killed yet. At first, we believed them, but we wanted a spiritual life, and we quickly noticed that Americans help you, whereas the Chinese don't. Probably the biggest help our American friends give us is by introducing the Institute for Advanced Physics, the IAP. IAP taught us so much. My husband wondered why Americans were okay with certain very bad moral evils. He learned how the IAP central theory answers this. We knew there had to be answers. We read Dr. Anthony Rizzi's A Kid's Introduction to Physics and were stunned to finally find out how God was. I never knew there was an unchangeable changer who was always with me. It actually scared me at first, and I stayed up all night when I learned about it. It's awesome, my husband exclaimed all day to people. The unchangeable changer, it's amazing. We realized God saved us, led us to America and to IAP. I've always been struck by how clear and consistent Dr. Rizzi's thinking is. It has introduced me to so many important truths that have changed my life, and I now know how great God is. I'm not interested in becoming Catholic. I am so grateful to be in America. It is such a special place, and I hope by hearing my story, you can see it more.
Thank you, Sally. We need to fight to recover and preserve American principles so the Sallys of the world have a place to come to still. We have so many fruits of those principles that come home during this period. Take, for example, Walt Disney. He iconifies what happens in movies and music in America. Disney has this Christian and family-inspiring base, family edifying. He introduces color and sound and lots of technical innovations is typical of Americans. The movie emphasizes sacrifice and good over evil, morality over immorality. It's explicitly in its biblical quotations. One of the things that I think iconifies this period of movies and so forth, and the respect for the family and the respect for God, is the movie Fantasia. At the end, there's this evil that takes over, the darkness takes over, And then how is it squelched? It's squelched by the monks coming to prayer and the Ave Maria being sung. And then gradually the evil dissipates and sunlight takes over. That sort of generally iconify the way American movies and music of the time were. You have, for example, Perry Como, who was the most paid per minute figure in the 60s. That's hard to believe, people forget that. And every show that he had on TV was so popular, he ended with the Ave Maria. And then we have during this time frame, Martin Luther King, who's such a big part of the American incarnation. He forces the end of the slavery mentality in American institutions by thought, by argument, by peaceful raising of people's spirits, by saying and by quoting St. Thomas and St. Augustine and showing people the principles and showing that we get them by argument, not by violence. And so there's all these fruits. So Ben, can you tell me what other fruits you see in this great period?
Well, it was an amazing period, and I was alive during a lot of that. And, just to look at the changes that happened in our country, again, going back to some of our underlying principles that helped to bring us forward to where we should be. I remember as a child going to the Deep South and seeing signs that said whites only, coloreds only, and people saying, make sure you pay attention to that, and here's what you got to do. And same lifetime, we have black admirals and generals and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and heads of foundations and university presidents. We had a president of the United States. It's amazing if you have the right anchor, the right moorings, where you can go and how quickly you can get there.
Let's take a moment to remember where we are. We're here at Fort McHenry, where a national anthem was written. And let's listen to that anthem and think about these amazing fruits and their source. Well, let's use Bing Crosby, who himself is, we call him Father O'Malley from the movie Bells of St. Mary's. He himself and the movie are examples of the American incarnation of the Christian tradition. But let's listen to Bing, and then we can get a sense of what the place that we're at in our country and look at some of the fruits as we listen.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
So there you have Bing Crosby. Like I say, he's one of the American incarnations of the Catholic tradition right there. Very popular singer, very beautiful voice, very, very amazing voice, and very typical of this time period, the fruits that the American produced. Very many people like this. So Ben, one of the big things done at the end of this period is the moon landing. It's the very end, kind of outside of it a little bit, but the fruits of it come from what happened in the mainstream of this period. The first man on the moon did a symbolic communion service, and a lot of people aren't aware of that.
Very, very cool. Amazing, yes. America's moon missions reminds us of how we are reaching always for higher things, for increase in virtue and spiritual depth. It took great commitment for us to get to the moon.
That's right. And as flight director, our next guest, Gene Kranz, was critical to the success of the moon mission. He is an American hero who reminds us of these American virtues, the amazing virtues. The moon landing required great knowledge and dedication. It reminds us of what we Americans are capable of and called to. After 57 years, this is important, many people don't know this, we're the only country that's landed on the moon. We are now planning to go to Mars. And let's bring in Captain Krantz. So Captain Krantz, we're glad to have you with us. Your life is an example, as I said, of failure is not an option. You served in NASA with astronauts and in Korea as a fighter pilot. What's the fastest you've ever flown?
It was a Super Sabre. It was in combat. We had about 1,600 miles an hour differential.
Wow. Wow, that's
Yeah, that's moving.
That's moving. You fought the communists there. The Soviets had a collectivist view of man that did not value the individual, as we know. How did we Americans prioritize life at NASA?
The mission rules that we developed always gave the benefit to the crew and the safety of the operation over achieving the objectives.
That's profound. Tell us about the origin of tough and competent.
After the Apollo 1 fire, I made a 20-minute talk to my controllers that became known as the Kranz dictum. It basically established, in my mind, the accountability for continuing operations in mission control. The words were tough and competent. That was the price for admission to our work.
Your concern for life was high from your American upbringing. Tell us your response to the death of the 3 men in the Apollo 1 fire. That was bad.
Well, I was so angry. I didn't sleep for 3 days.
Wow. How do you see the role of God in all your 34 years of work at NASA and mission control?
There's no question that throughout my life, with all the changes I had somebody up there guiding me to my objective.
Tell us more on that.
I believe the Holy Ghost provided tough and competent to my vocabulary.
How did Americans live out their devotion to God that you saw?
I always prayed before the mission. I had a pastor, Father Cargill. I attended Mass before every launch, and I would get a blessing from Father Cargill for that mission. He was very close to me and to the astronauts. So he basically issued that blessing, and I believe that it carried forth in our performance as a team.
It seems you're saying God was certainly guiding things.
I have a series of, I won't say memos, but write-ups of the meetings I had with my team, and I just reviewed it in preparation for this talk with you. And it was really amazing to find out the things that I said that I did not know. The words at the time, but they fit the occasion, and they lived forever. Anthony, when I look back at a lot of things, I feel the Holy Spirit.
You told us you live by the 10 Commandments and the Airman's Code. Can you summarize that code for us?
I'm an American airman. My duty is to fly, fight, and win. Then it continues on and says, I will never leave an airman behind.
What do you want to leave all of us with?
At this time in our nation, it is essential that we stand for the principles that have given us the freedom, the joy, and the independence at many stages in our life. The principles are objective. They must be recognized and acted upon and lived. Principles guide our lives.
I know you've had a lot happening today and you must be kind of tired. So let me say thank you very much for your service to our country. You're an inspiration, definitely part of the American incarnation of the Catholic tradition.
I will never be tired when I'm working with you.
Today, compared to Crance's era, we see a radically different America where the principles are barely evident. This radical shift began in the 60s, and it's still happening today.
In about 1965, the equation-alone physics finally outpaced the growth of American principles. The equation-alone physics teaches us to substitute symbols for reality. We lose touch with nature and our understanding of nature and nature's God. As Americans, so this is important. Nature and nature's God is where we start with nature and we move to nature's God. And if we lose that, we've lost our principles. As American principles grow, so does the parasitic infection of scientism, which American principles push back against, but they also can grow it if we're not careful. It first invades the intellectual class because they are the most trained in the consequences, and then it moves into the culture. But it only penetrates the popular culture once universal education is near complete and mass communications like radio and TV are in place so it can be transmitted to everyone. And it's in all of us. And then it can begin to seep its principles into the average person till the infection of the equation-alone physics overpowers the growth of American principles, which is what happened in 65.
In this period from 65 to today, prayer in schools was overturned, as was the robust celebration of Christmas, Easter, etc. Christian life began to evaporate from the public square. The Ten Commandments, which are a sharp expression of natural law, and other things like it, were removed from schools. Abortion, divorce, transgenderism, all those things became more acceptable.
Archbishop Corleone, can you tell us one of the iconic examples of what we have lost because of the action of the equation-alone physics since 1965?
Well, my memories are still very vivid when I was a child about how much religion was just a part of the fabric of society. I went to public school, and at Christmas time, we had a little presentation. We each presented the Christmas customs of the culture that our families came from. Back then, there wasn't 24-hour television. The TV stations would have a cutoff, and then they put their logo on. They would always end with some kind of a spiritual message. They would have a clergyman give a reflection, or one I remember, they were reading from Psalm 139, and with this Air Force jet flying through the sky, it's the one about, where can I go to escape you, O God? If I climb the heavens, you are there. If I go to the depths, you are there.
Yeah. So now let's discuss how to regain these principles and how to re-educate ourselves to celebrate them and have them again. What's in your gut, your instinct, versus what's in your mouth, your words, those are distinct things. The founders had much more in their gut than we do. Our guts are pretty much of a mess. Even when the founders said, mostly in private, scientized things and so-called enlightenment things, they weren't in their guts in the way they are in our guts. We can say things, but our guts are not well formed, any of us more now. We have to do lots of work to reform our guts, so the formative process is needed. Like a well-trained fireman and other first responders, we have to learn the principles and train ourselves in them so we act immediately on them. The firemen act from their training instantly, and that's the way we have to redevelop our gut. Until we respond well to all that is happening to rebuild our principles, we won't be able to do that. We have to do that so that the principles can live in a 21st century way that they have never lived before. If they don't live in us, they can't live in the 21st century.
All of this important information and much more is in the two articles that we've mentioned, What is America, Part 1 and Part 2. This is how we learn, this is how we respect our country, and this is the way to be patriotic. Please check out iapweb.org and get America 1 and 2.
We have some recommendations for what to do on the 4th to celebrate the Declaration of Principles.
Yes, one thing we could do is read out loud Abraham Lincoln's wonderful second inaugural address and think about it. Or read out Washington's Thanksgiving Day proclamation and really think about the words. And be sorry for our neglect of all that we've been given and deliberate going against those principles. And be thankful for all we've been given and be glad that we have the opportunity to still grow in the freedom to go to discover the truth. And
take part in ringing bells on July the 4th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Get your bells. Tell your churches to do it too. We can all be a part of this. You know, every day when I wake up, I praise God that I'm here in this country. I think about all the people who shed their blood and gave their lives for us. And it doesn't matter where your ancestors came from. You're probably better off here than you would be there. And this is our country. All of us need to learn about our country, learn our history, learn about those principles, and recognize that we are not enemies. Don't listen to those people who try to divide us on the basis of race, age, income, gender, political affiliation, religion. We are Americans. This is America. And you and me, we're the ones who make it America. We need to rededicate ourselves to our country and to our God by taking time to learn and meditate on truth.
For we are made for truth.
Yes. So get material, learn the physics. Please do get the Science Before Science, a guide to thinking in the 21st century, and the Kids' Introduction to Physics and Beyond. Now, physics is not bad if you understand. You get the basics of it. It makes a heck of a lot of sense, right? Start getting grounded in the root of our American principles.
Yes, I agree. Remember that patriotism lived by doing such things for your country is a Christian duty.
Let's listen now to the third verse of the Star Spangled Banner with Bing Crosby. Now, every time we hear the Star Spangled Banner, we should think of the principles of our country. When we hear the lyrics that God is our guide, remember He is nature's God, and we have to know nature to know Him properly. He is truth Himself, for which we are made.
In this light, please think especially about this part as it's sung. May the heaven rescued land. Praise the power that has made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just. And this be our motto, in God is our trust.
Oh, thus be ever when free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace. May the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
All right, and really do think about the verses of that national anthem. It's profound. And Bishop, would you mind doing a closing prayer for us?
Sure. Let us pray now using President Washington's prayer in his own words. May we unite in most humbly offering our prayers and supplications to the great Lord and ruler of nations, and beseech Him to pardon our national and other transgressions, and promote the knowledge and practice of true religion and virtue, and the increase of science. Washington would tell us to find our principles and stand on them again. In particular, let us seek to amend the intellectual sloth so prevalent in our contemporary society by making a strong commitment to recognizing and rejecting the false understanding of the physical world currently driving our culture. Let us commit to learning the proper grounding and meaning of the principles of our country. Let us pray. Thank you, Lord of all creation, for the bounty which you have given us throughout our 250 years. We are sorry for our many transgressions. We hereby commit to repairing and recovering the truths we have lost, and appreciating those we still have. Help us to grow in brotherhood. We gratefully celebrate you and your good blessings. We ask that you give us the grace to persevere in our journey toward seeing you, who are truth himself. Make our beloved country the vital temporal instrument of this journey of coming to yourself as she is meant to be. We ask for the intercession of Our Lady, who interceded at the Battle of New Orleans, and who, under the title of the Immaculate Conception, is America's patroness. We ask for the prayers of St. Thomas Aquinas for our country, for it is he you chose to be the instrument and grounding political philosophy and the proper understanding of the physical world, the proper physics, so that we Americans could have these principles so deeply and clearly to form ourselves into these United States of America 250 years ago, this 4th of July. On that day, our nation adopted the Declaration, which calls forth the principles of the natural law that define us. It thereby declares our dedication to you and what you would have us to be and do. May we hold these truths again tightly, and let us say finally with the Declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Other parting words, Archbishop?
John Kennedy's famous line, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. But you have to begin by understanding what your country is and what are the principles of your country and what makes America great. We cannot get it back just by putting Band-Aids on the problem. We have to get to the root of the problem and understand the foundational principles.
I urge us all to become again one nation under God, so we will not, as Reagan said, be a nation gone under.
Let me now thank EWTN and Mother Angelica, who are both part of the amazing American incarnation of the Catholic tradition. And thank you all, Bishop Paprocki, Dr. Carson. Thank you also to Archbishop Corleone and Jean Krantz for this important celebration. Thank all of you. And let us all take hold of the liberty, the right to do what's right, and do it. Remember, the founders fought for the grounded principles, not for independence for its own sake, but for the sake of the principles. Thank you for watching, and let's begin holding those truths again and reclaiming our founding principles. Happy 4th, and what I like to say is Happy Declaration of Principles Day. Thank you.